galaxy of distinguished panelists today on our program, sir. Thank you so much. Is Vipul there? Vipul, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, Sanjay. How are you?
Good. Great. So,
Sir.
nowadays...
Good afternoon, Senior Vice President Saab and the Chairman Saab. Good afternoon, everyone.
Mr. SP Sharma?
Ji, SP Sharma.
Yeah. Good to see you, Mr. Sharma. Mr. Sharma, by the way, is our Chief Economist at PhD CCI, PhD Chamber, Mr. SP Sharma.
Ji, namaskar, sir. Namaskar.
So, shall we start, Mr. Madan?
Yes, absolutely. We are ready.
Or shall we wait for another 3-4 minutes?
Exactly 2 o'clock.
You can wait for 2-3 minutes, sir. Then we will start at
5 minutes past 2, I think.
After 2-3 minutes.
Okay.
I think.
Good afternoon to everyone.
That people should join in if they are waiting, and you are starting in 3 minutes. Why don't you make an announcement?
Yeah, so we shall be starting in next 3 minutes if people will keep joining in, but we will start with Mr. Sanjay Agrawal, who will be introducing. So in next 3 minutes we will be starting this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon, Pawanji.
Good afternoon, Jay. How are you, Madan sir?
Very fine, all well. Pawanji is Executive Director in Solvency and Bankruptcy Board of India.
Welcome, Mr. Kumar.
Thank you very much, sir.
Vipul
thank you.
Maheshwari, Chairman, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Committee of PhD Chamber of Commerce.
I for a moment thought Chairman, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. My heartbeat for a moment was कब change हो गया पता ही नहीं चला. Just joking, because things are very gloomy otherwise.
Yeah. So it's now probably it's time to start. Mr. Sanjay, why don't you start with the Sanjay Agrawal?
Senior Vice President Saab. I think he is busy with
No. I was there, just got a call. Sorry.
Ji.
I think around 200 participants have already joined.
Yeah. So, firstly, we request our Senior Vice President to welcome all and provide his welcome remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Abhishek Singhvi, Senior Advocate and Member of Parliament, although that does not do justice to his profile fully. Mr. Pawan Kumar, Executive Director, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. Justice M.M. Kumar, Chief Justice retired of J&K High Court and past President of NCLT. Dr. U.K. Chaudhary, Senior Advocate and President, NCLT-BA. Mr. Vipul Maheshwari, my colleague, Chairman of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Committee in the PhD Chamber. Mr. G.P. Madan and Mr. Dinesh Agarwal, Co-Chairman of the Insolvency Committee in the Chamber. Mr. Saurabh Sanyal, Secretary General, PhD Chamber. Dr. S.P. Sharma, Chief Economist, PhD CCI. Delegates and participants, distinguished former presidents of the Chamber and members of our Managing Committee. It's a very, very good afternoon to you all, and it's really a pleasure to see such a large attendance on this seminar. I think this shows the interest that the words of our eminent panelists carry and the expectations that we have of having some very positive and interactive dialogue today. So it's really my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to this webinar today on the impact of the pandemic COVID-19 on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. PhD Chamber appreciates the proactive and fast-track measures already undertaken by the government in the light of COVID-19, which include the increasing of default threshold for insolvency from rupees 1 lakh to 1 crore. And the suspension of the corporate insolvency resolution process for 6 months for the financial creditor, which is, of course, given some relief to the embattled companies who are very hard hit by the additional value of the COVID-19, in addition to their being stressed in the first place, and why that's why they were involved in the proceedings of insolvency board. The deferment of EMIs and loans and various steps taken by the government or RBI have, of course, also been of some help to the trade. But we need to acknowledge that this COVID-19 is going to create further complications and difficulties for the resolution process itself also. And we need to do some more rethink on the international best practices in the insolvency arena that one sees across the world, which have been, for various reasons, probably not been utilized by us till now. For example, pre-pack. Pre-pack is a concept which is very prevalent in Europe and even in the US, and that makes the life easy and simple for everybody. And it does away with this complicated process of 1 year, which extends to 1.5 years or 2 years sometimes, of insolvency, which actually gets the results for the creditor, and the business gets going. So there is minimum loss of employment also. So that is one aspect which I would recommend the panelists, the distinguished panelists here today to discuss. One more suggestion that I have is that usually in the West, during the insolvency process, when a company or a business is transferred, one very effective method that is utilized is that for a new company to be formed with the same name as the old company, and the old company getting some numeric generic name, some any other name. But then what happens is that the new company actually takes over the business and the running assets and on a going concern basis, and the old company is the one which keeps on dragging if the process is to be dragged on for liquidation or whatever parts need to be sorted out. Those get sorted out later, but they are cut away from the business which keeps running. So if these two aspects could be considered by the panelists today, sir, I would personally feel obliged on that. I really hope that today's discussions prove to be very useful for everybody concerned. And I would now hand over the proceedings to Mr. Vipul Maheshwari, my colleague and chairman of the Insolvency Committee. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Pawan Kumar, Executive Director, IBBI, Dr. Abhishek Singhvi, Member of Parliament and a Senior Advocate in Supreme Court, Mr. M.M. Kumar, former Chairman, National Company Law Tribunal, Mr. U.K. Chaudhary, President, National Company Law Tribunal, Mr. Saurabh Sanyal, Mr. G.P. Madan, Mr. Dinesh Agrawal, who are the co-chairs in my committee, Dr. S.P. Sharma, Chief Economist, delegates, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I am honored and pleased to welcome you all to the webinar on impact of COVID-19 on insolvency and bankruptcy code. As a chamber, we have made this endeavor to bring the subject to life for the advantage of the relevant stakeholders. It is my privilege to welcome Dr. Abhishek Singhvi, Member of Parliament and Senior Advocate, Mr. Pawan Kumar, Executive Director, IBBI, Mr. M.M. Kumar, Mr. U.K. Chaudhary, and other participants of this webinar, along with the other distinguished speakers. I'm happy to introduce PhD Chamber of Commerce to you all. PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry has been working as a catalyst for the promotion of industry, trade, and entrepreneurship for the past 115 years. It is forward-looking, proactive, and dynamic pan-India apex organization. As a partner in progress with industry and government, PhD Chamber, with a special focus on MSME, works at a grassroots level with strong national and international linkages for propelling progress, harmony, and integrated development of the Indian economy. We are globally connected through institutional linkages with over 100 important foreign chambers of commerce. With a strong sector-focused over 30 expert and state committees, the chamber works at the grassroots level to promote socio-economic development and aids capacity building in several fields. The chamber attracts great importance to these committees for rendering effective and result-oriented services to its members. As we all know that COVID-19 has retreated the momentum of the wheels of the world economy, and Indian economy is also not an exception. The All India Association of Industries had estimated a loss of over $35 billion due to continued pan-India lockdown till now. In order to prevent and absorb the effect of such huge losses and to respond to the changing business environment in the wake of globally spread WHO declared pandemic, the central government seems to be responding in a structured manner by providing various SOPs, relaxations, extensions, and amendments to the existing legal framework in the country. Across the world, due to COVID-19, supply chains are disrupted. Valuation of the stocks have substantially decreased amidst global downselling, and the valuation of businesses have fallen steeply. Further, the lockdown has also disrupted the performance of the contracts and payments thereof. This is a trigger event for creditors, both financial and operational, to initiate insolvency against such corporate debtors. The Honorable Supreme Court recently also refused to intervene and stay the order of the Ministry of Home Affairs, orders directing micro, small, and medium enterprises to pay full wages, thereby creating more burden on MSME sector. In such a scenario, it was also imperative that insolvency and resolution processes under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code may also be relooked from different viewpoints. It is accepted that if insolvency proceedings are initiated at a mass scale, then it can have a devastating impact on the economy, given the fact that during the corporate insolvency resolution process, the management of the corporate debtor switches hands with the resolution professional who is liable to carry out such activities that are essential for running the businesses as going concern. In order to avoid such a situation where corporates are forced into insolvency proceedings, the Union Cabinet has decided that an ordinance would be promulgated to suspend sections 7, 9, and 10 of the IBC, would be suspended for 6 months, and the suspension time can be extended up to 1 year. An enabling provision with respect to extending the time would be part of the ordinance. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs, by the notification dated March 24, 2020, increased the threshold of initiating the insolvency resolution process from 1 lakh to rupees 1 crore under Section 4 of the IBC. However, it is important to mention that the notification does not mention any clarification on how the pending cases which has been filed, but the same has not been adjudicated by the Honorable Tribunal. The above amendments may assist medium and small industries from the risk of initiation of CIRP. However, it cannot also be phased out that this amendment will also adversely impact an ability of operational creditors to initiate CIRP, since the minimum default amount is now 10 times higher than the previous minimum default limit. Further, as per existing norms, if a payment default exceeds 90 days, then the lender concerned has to refer the account for resolution under IBC or any other mechanism permitted by the Reserve Bank of India. On account of COVID-19, it was notified that all benches of NCLT shall hear only inevitable urgent cases with prior notification on email from applicants, insofar as matters not construed as urgent, for example, pertaining to the extension of time, approval of resolution plan, and liquidation under IBC. The Honorable Supreme Court, by its order dated 23rd March 2020, extended the period of limitation for proceedings before all courts tribunals in the country with effect from 15th March 2020 till further orders, which is having a direct implication in the matters pertaining to the insolvency. Pursuant to the amendment, Regulation 40C has been inserted, which is a special provision in relation to meeting of the timelines in pursuance of CIRP. Prior to the amendments in response to COVID-19, the IBC was revamped by an Amendment Act to make the resolution process more effective and to promote ease of doing business. This included Section 32A, liability for offences committed prior to CIRP, Section 14, government authorizations and essential supplies during moratorium. It is imperative to watch how the industry at large are affected by the amendments brought by the government and what next steps may be initiated. In the given grave and challenging conditions where several companies under the bankruptcy resolution process may also see potential buyers pulling out even in cases where the deals were in the final stages of bids submitted. As COVID-19 crisis has put a question mark on valuations and viability of businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, with these thoughts in mind, I leave the rest to the experts in today's very crucial discussion and take this opportunity to thank our audience and well-wishers from the industry stakeholders whom the chamber stands tall at all times. I now proceed to read a very short summary of our chief guest, Dr. Abhishek Singhvi, his achievements. Though we had initially scheduled Dr. Singhvi for 20 minutes, knowing his great experience as particular to speak before court and media, even it takes some few minutes extra in his inaugural address. On a lighter note, since he stays near to my house, COVID-19 has not allowed us to walk together. Although our walk are missing, but I have been able to enjoy his stories and anecdotes over WhatsApp almost daily. Dr. Singhvi is a senior 3-term member of parliament. He is a former chairman, Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice. He was India's youngest designated senior advocate at 34 and India's youngest appointed additional solicitor general at the age of 37. He is well-known author and columnist and a visible media personality. He is also the senior most serving national spokesperson of the Congress Party. His columns have appeared in India's 2 top English dailies and have been published as 2 books titled Candid Corner and Straight Talk, both with forewords written by Dr. Manmohan Singh, former Prime Minister of India. He is also an occasional columnist in major Hindi dailies. Awarded the Global Leader for Tomorrow Award by World Economic Forum at Davos in 1999. Dr. Singhvi has been the opening lead speaker for the Treasury Congress benches in Parliament for almost every major debate from 2006 to 2013. He has been the common factor in almost all landmark Supreme Court cases, spanning constitutional law, corporate law, and arbitration, and several other subjects. He supports many charities, including the Prayas Center for Destitute Children and the Singhvi Scholarship at Trinity College, Cambridge. This is apart from the sterling work done by him over 12 years in Rajasthan from his MP Lard funds, supporting 400 projects in the field of health and education. Now, I would like to request Mr. Kumar, Mr. Pawan Kumar, Executive Director, IBBI, to say a few words. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to the distinguished panelists and to dear friends. I am thankful to the PhD Chamber of Commerce for giving me an opportunity to share the views of the government. As regards impact of COVID-19 is concerned, I think no other sector of the economy will be feeling it will be adversely affected than the small and medium enterprises are concerned. As regards the response of the government to this unprecedented crisis is concerned, the government has been forthright in coming with a prompt response, which is in accordance with the requirements of the market. The government was quick in responding and was conscious of its responsibility to protect the small and medium enterprises. And with that view in mind, the threshold for invoking the provisions of insolvency, the threshold monetary limit of rupees 1 lakh was increased to 1 crore. This was, I would say that this notification came in on 24th of March, which was, I think, the earliest response, as much as the lockdown also started around the same time. Another response was to the decision which is still pending, and it is there before the government with regard to the suspension of the provisions for invoking the insolvency provisions. As regards the exclusion of time is concerned, I would say that Vipulji has covered primarily some of the aspects, but I would like to go that in detail that National Company Law Appellate Tribunal also took a suo moto cognizance of the situation arising out of this pandemic and was prompt in giving a ruling that all the time limits, the time period of lockdown will be excluded in counting to in which are pending the proceedings before any, whether NCLT or NCLAT. Another issue with regard to giving relief is concerned, we all know that IBC has been a landmark reform in the arena of the debtor creditor market. Long time back, that 2016 before, we all know that the insolvency used to be a painful process, and how much it has helped in last 3 years in helping the industry and business to recover amount. By going by the estimates which are available in the market, around 4 lakh crore rupee has already been recovered through this medium. So what has been game changer for the industry has been the prompt response of the government in not only promulgating the law, but I think it is one of the youngest body in the world which has no parallel, that within 3 years not only the law was enacted, but the baby could not enjoy its babyhood and rather is running like more like an adult, with the result that it has not only given a helping hand to the business but provided a suitable business environment to the industry wherein the transactions could safely take place, and industry, it has given a confidence to the business. But unfortunately, the pandemic of COVID-19 has brought in some sort of urgency in this climate, whereby again we have taken some small baby steps to make sure that interests of the business are not adversely impacted. Another, we have made a change in the regulation was in the CIRP regulations. We have made the change that whatever the time limits are applicable, though briefly Vipul has touched upon them, that time limits have also been extended. The period of lockdown will not be counted towards the CIRP processes. However, we are still encouraging the insolvency professionals to update their skills, and we have allowed the IPS as well as RVOs to go online for the first time and do the continuing professional education programs through the webinars and other available online content which can be used for this purpose. Now, another thing we have made is we have changed the IP regulations, wherein the IP was required to make annual compliances. The time limit which is available was 30th April. This has also been uh, increased to 30th June now by way of an amendment in the IP regulations. Another change, which IBBI has brought in is the model bylaws have been amended, whereby certain increased flexibility has been given for applying for AFA and approval of AFA to the IPS. Not only this, we have also suspended the examinations, the limited insolvency examination which was being conducted for the prospective applicants. That time limit has also been extended. So these are few steps which we feel would help in easing out the process of pain which the professionals as well as the processes which are pending before the NCLT and NCLT have been taken care of. On the legislative front also certain changes have been made, and the forum like this, I expect that the something would emerge out of this, and some suggestions, whatever changes come forward, I would urge the office bearers of the PhD Chamber of Commerce to give us those suggestions so that we can examine, the government can have a look and see how this process can be further carried forward. Further, I would like to dwell upon the role of insolvency professionals. I'm reminded of a letter Honorable Justice Kumar had sent on the last day when he was demitting his office. I'm grateful to the kind of commitment which has been shown by him, and sending a letter to us to even on the last day when people are busy in other mundane things, he was still thinking of the profession going ahead and gave some meaningful suggestions. Sir, through this platform, I would like to assure you, sir, we are looking into those suggestions, and as guided by you, we are examining and taking effective steps how to move forward on those initiatives. There was one issue of how to ensure that the responsibility which has been bestowed upon the insolvency professionals under the code, they are being treated as an officer. I'm sure that there is a judgment of Honorable Company Law Tribunal in the case of Nu Metal, where it has been mentioned that nature of duties which are assigned to a insolvency professional are similar to that of a government servant. So, and certain instances in the recent past have come to the notice where it has been pointed out by the captains of the industry and some representatives that the role played by was not in the balance. There needs to be a check and balance on the conduct of the IPs. So we are conscious, sir. We are examining and taking necessary corrective action in consultation with the insolvency professional agencies who are our frontline regulators. We have also taken care to ensure that the inspection and monitoring mechanism is made effective, and in the last couple of years we have conducted about 67 inspections have been ordered in the case where the conduct was not found to be conforming to the provisions of law. Sir, as a result of this, 27 show cause notices we have issued out of those 67 cases. So what I want to assure is, sir, the insolvency professionals, the conduct and the mechanism is being monitored, and it is being continuously, the government is aware of its responsibility, and we are carrying out due diligence to the maximum extent. Now, with these words, I would just, before ending, I would say that I recently read in one of the articles that May, the word May, as the word signifies, it is a month of hope. Now we are in the month of May, and the word May signifies hope. May we find a cure soon, and may our fears be put down to rest. This is what I am hoping. And but there has to be no may in our efforts. I would say the word shall has to be used in our efforts in defeating this pandemic which our country is facing. So with these words, I would like to express my gratitude to all the office learned bearers of the PhD Chamber of Commerce for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. Thank you very much. Have a nice time. Stay safe.
Thank you, Mr. Pawan Kumar. I know that you've been keeping today very busy and you had a lot of schedules today. And thank you for being here today with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now,
Vipin.
I would like to invite Mr. M.M. Kumar, who is a former President, National Company Law Tribunal and a former Chief Justice of Jammu and Kashmir High Court. While as a President, Mr. Kumar has delivered a lot of good judgments in National Company Law Tribunal. Now, I request Mr. Kumar to speak his views.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari, Dr. Singhvi, Dr. Chaudhary, Mr. G.P. Madan, Mr. Sharma, Mr. Pawan Kumar, and Mr. Dinesh Agrawal, all the panelists, ladies and gentlemen who have logged in. There is hardly any doubt that COVID-19 has come as an avalanche and has swept the world economy. The crisis may be much larger than it may seem, and how it has impacted, I would try to sum up within 10 minutes allotted to me. Dr. Maheshwari has rightly observed the value of the assets have considerably depleted.
Sorry to interrupt you, Justice Kumar. I think Mr. Maheshwari and Mr. The VP, PhD should mute themselves, or you can't hear. Mr. Maheshwari also has to mute himself.
No, I'm there. Hello. Hello.
No, you can't hear Justice Kumar unless you mute yourself. Mute. Press the mute button. Yes.
Mute button, Dr. Maheshwari. So Dr. Maheshwari has rightly observed that there is considerable fall in the value of the assets, and it is going to significantly impact the pending cases itself. Never mind about the cases which are to come. The resolution plan which have been submitted before the COC, Committee of Creditors, and are pending fresh examination, and the resolution plan applicant would surely be filing application through which they have been given, and on that basis they have submitted their resolution plan, would need to be revised, be considerably fallen. Secondly, the resolution plan which have been approved already by the COC and are pending before the adjudicating authority NCLT for approval, some relief is required to be given, because if a resolution plan applicant who is successful before the COC, he resile, there are penal provision in the code. How to avoid, how to give the benefit of submitting a revised resolution plan before the adjudicating authority, because COC has approved, and if somebody resile, in a number of cases we have seen wherever a successful resolution plan applicant before COC tried to drag his feet, then became heavily, and even fines were imposed, and prosecution has been taken out by the IBBI. So there is no amendment so far carried. So therefore, either judicial mechanism has to be evolved, taking note of, because force majeure is a very much prevalent. It would come out of the interpretation of those clauses. Likewise, the resolution plan pending before the appellate tribunal after having received the approval from the National Company Law Tribunal. So this area is also impacted significantly. Now the second part is suspension of 7, 9 and 10 for a period of 6 months, extendable for a further period of 1 year. I think this again would not be very sufficient. Reason being, the industry to come back on the rail, you can see the labor problem, you can see the industry under lock, you can see financial problems. So every left, right, center, the industry is doomed. So either, because to me, suspending 7, 9 and 10 for 6 months or 1 year may not be able to overcome the impact which the COVID-19 has created. That is my humble view. And what is to be done? Side by side, some package has to be given to this impacted industry. You see, before 2014, the bank used to dole out loan freely. Now, after enactment of IBC, I have maintained elsewhere also the IBC code has been able to resolve more than 6 lakh crore assets, stress assets. So the money with the financial institution, banks, etc., is quite adequate. Is there a possibility somebody have to explore to give some package to the impacted industry? For example, airline companies, hotel, restaurant, you name any, but these are the ones which come to the surface straightway. So something apart from suspending 7, 9, 10, something has to be done with regard to the financial conditions of these companies. The amendments which have been made, reference has already been made to amendment made in section 4, raising the threshold. It's fine, some relief is there to MSME. As Mr. Pavan Kumar from the IBPI has mentioned, this amendment in one way is a welcome step. But however, if an MSME has supplied goods, which ordinarily is the case, and it is to recover 50 lakhs, it is to recover 70 lakhs, it is debarred to file any application under section 9 as an operational creditor. MSME, there is the provision has not been made that MSME are not debarred. The reason is only made that threshold is increased to 1 crore under the provision. One thing I can clarify, the delegated legislation can never be retrospective. It will apply only to cases which are to be filed, not to cases which have already been filed. Because delegated legislation in law, it is well settled, can never be retrospective unless the parliament in the proviso to section 4 has itself provided for this. So therefore, there is no question, because some doubt was raised by somebody. So this will impact only the cases which are to be filed after the amendment, that is after 24th March 2020. So on the one hand, the amendment seeks to serve MSME sector. On the other hand, it also deals a blow to the MSME sector. How to address this? How to, and moreover, when you test somebody's liquidity, you don't put a very higher threshold. In England, the threshold is around 1,000. Why it has been kept that low? Because if you are unable to pay £1,000, how can you pay 10,000? It is true, it is a test to test somebody's liquidity, the liquidity of the company. If you cannot pay, I am repeating, if you cannot pay £1,000, how can you pay 10,000? If you cannot pay ₹1,00,000, how can you pay 1 crore? So it has to be looked from the proper perspective. So this is one aspect of section 4. I hope that instead of working to the disadvantage of the MSME, it works to the advantage of the MSME. The other question is, the other amendment was in the area of home buyers. 10% or 100 home buyers, because the amendment which was carried, that amendment in section 21, 3 provisos were added. First was for the depositors, the second was for the home buyer, third was that it would apply to the pending cases not admitted. The third proviso, status quo, has been ordered by the Supreme Court. Because it is an ordinance, therefore it can be retrospective. The Supreme Court for the present has ordered status quo. That amendment came on 28th of December. So that also raises a number of issues, because there is no mechanism provided that 100 home buyers, how the 100 would come, and then how 1 crore and 100 would match. That would be another question. There are a number of issues which would come from the amendment. Then, yes, Regulation 40C has been added by the IBBI, as has been rightly pointed out by Mr. Pavan Kumar, taking out the period of COVID-19 from the period of 180 days for the corporate insolvency resolution process, or 270 days or 330 days. That period, there are doubts as to whether there is a specific power to frame such a regulation by way of amendment. With the IBBI, elsewhere I have raised that doubt. The other thing which has been mentioned by Mr. Pavan Kumar with regard to the insolvency professional, I am grateful that the suggestion which I made during the last week of my office as President NCLT are being taken care of. The other thing is the RBI issued regulatory package on 27th of March, along with the statement of development of regulatory policy, acknowledging that default should not be the basis of accounts becoming NPA for a period of 90 days. That is up to 31st of May 2020. But even that was not being followed by the banks. So the High Court of Delhi, in 2 cases, that is Ananta Raj versus Yes Bank and Usha Khan Shakuntala Education versus Punjab and Sindh Bank. In 2 cases, the High Court of Delhi has issued interim order debarring the banks to declare the accounts NPA. Likewise, the Bombay High Court has also followed the same principle. So with these words, I express my gratitude to the PhD Chamber of Commerce for giving me opportunity to share my views with you. And I wish all of you
Thank you, Mr. Kumar, and thanks for giving the perspective from the bench perspective. And thank you for your very good remarks on the impact of this COVID. Now, I would like to invite Dr. UK Chaudhary, who is a senior advocate and president of NCLT. And of course, he's going to be defending a lot of creditors before the court in a time to come. And would like to know your perspective, Dr. UK Chaudhary.
Actually, Chief Justice M.M. Kumar, Dr. Singhvi, my colleagues Vipul Maheshwari and J.P. Madan, senior functionaries of PhD-CCI, the participants in the webinar, professional friends. In the limited time slot of 10 minutes, I'll try to complete the presentation, and I start by saying that I will divide the impact of COVID-19 into 3 areas. Number 1, something which is non-legislative but has a very wide impact on the proceedings under the IB Code. The second are legislative changes, and the third is the proposals which are pending, and to see whether those proposals will be effective as being thought to meet the requirements of the INB Code. The first one, which I'm saying is non-legislative, is the impact of COVID on the functioning of the tribunals itself. Right from January and February, we started observing that as and when the social distancing formula was being adopted very vigorously by the government and by the persons managing the COVID-19, it was found that it was not possible to physically meet. And therefore it impacted immediately the working of the tribunal, that the physical court proceedings were no more possible. It started first that there was a complete closure. Neither the courts were meeting, nor there was any possibility of having hearings through the video conferencing. But sooner the impact was observed that you can't keep the justice away from the people, and particularly the litigants and the professionals. Then it was found that slowly and slowly we got into a new mode of the court proceedings, which is through the video conferencing now, as we are observing that this has brought about a conceptual change, that the court proceedings, in my opinion, will never be the same again, as it has clearly impacted, not only in the positive sense. We are not aware that how effective is the substitute of the video conferencing for the physical court's functioning. But few things, as observed by Dr. Singhvi in the beginning, that few things are very good to observe it. Number 1, that through the video conferencing, you can never have the long unwinding arguments. So there are no hearings ad nauseum. You can't go on arguing and arguing and arguing ad nauseum. Similar is the second impact, that the interruptions which were coming from the opposite counsel in the middle of an argument, particularly when the arguments are good and pleasing to the court, there were constant interruptions. And therefore those interruptions have also stopped, because you can't have an interruption on a video conferencing. When somebody is arguing, you just can't butt in and start interrupting like you can physically do in the court. It was becoming a practice not liked by the court, and most of the times I have seen even Justice Kumar, in fact, raising his voice and saying, please sit down and take your seat. Don't interrupt the proceedings in between. This has some positive aspects that the functioning of the court is seen. We are not sure how long it will continue. We are also not sure whether the physical court's proceedings will resume to the same effect, or the video conferencing will left its mark, and therefore there will be certain things which will continue with the video conferencing, and therefore that's one impact the COVID has left on the functioning of the courts and the tribunals equally, right from the Honorable Supreme Court up to the Honorable Tribunal. The second part of the COVID impacting the IB Code are certain legislative changes. Now, right from the most important, where the number of home buyers who can initiate or trigger the CIR process was raised from individuals to 100 home buyers, or 10% of the members of a particular project, that is the home buyers in a project. It has already seen a challenge in the Honorable Supreme Court. Similarly, the change from 1 lakh eligibility criteria, raising it to 100 crores, as Vipul said, it's not 10 times, it's actually 100 times. From 1 lakh, it has become 100 lakhs. And therefore, it's a substantial change that raising the eligibility criteria from 1 lakh to 100 lakhs, that is 1 crore, is a big jump. And it may have its own counterproductive arguments that it may ease out the burden on the small and medium sector companies. But as Justice Kumar has already said, that it will also impact the recovery of the same small and medium sized companies from recovering from the others, particularly as an operational creditor. This has yet to see the legality to be tested in a court of law. We will only come to know as and when it is challenged. It has its own repercussions. Cumulative, we adopt 9 also. Right. From third issue, which is also legislative, which have already been brought in, is the changes in the regulations, that is Regulation 40C and the Regulation 47A, which has changed the formula for calculating the requirement of 270 days and now 330 days, as already the Honorable Supreme Court also has said that it could have been otherwise done by the tribunals in the judgment of the SR Steel. But one thing which I would like to bring to the notice of every participant is that other than the change in the Regulation 40C and 47A, there is a suo motu company appeal number 1 of 2020, which was taken up by the Honorable Acting Chairperson and Honorable Justice A.B. Singh, where an effective order has been passed dated 30th of March 2020. And by that judicial order, the same effect as is contained for an exclusion in 40C and 47A now also form part of this judicial order, which is passed by the appellate authority. And the Honorable Authority has already taken care of that even if 47C and 47A may have some legality. The judgment of the Honorable Appellate Tribunal in the matter of Suo Moto Company Appeal 1 of 2020 has already taken care of it. Though the doubt still may be raised that Honorable Supreme Court has an Article 142 where it can pass any order in the interest of justice. But can a suo moto sweeping order can also be passed by the tribunal when it does not have such a residuary power? The issue may still be raised at one point or the other, but nonetheless, as of now, we have this issue, which is now for other higher courts to decide whether such a suo moto order could be passed in Company Appeal 1 of 2020 is legally sustainable. The other legislative changes are the introduction of 32A and the concept of a clean slate, as has been in the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in SR Steel, are the new concepts which have yet to be seen, that how they have to be implemented in giving an effective implementation to the provisions and the requirements of the INB code, and what is the true meaning of the phrase clean slate as used in the SR Steel, and similarly whether the exemption which has to be granted under 32A to all the promoters, that is the resolution applicant, and also granted to the corporate debtor post the resolution process being successfully adopted under the provisions of IB code, are still the legal issues which will be seen only until settled by the Honorable Supreme Court. The last, which is highly debatable and which may have more counterproductive arguments, are the provisions which are proposed, that is the third stage, particularly that there is a lot of reporting in the newspapers, particularly, though we haven't seen the promulgation of any ordinance as yet, but there is a newspaper report that the government is thinking or toying with the idea of suspending the provisions of section 7, 9, and 10. There is also issues being raised that what is the correlation between section 7 and 9 and section 10, because the footing of section 10 is entirely a different criteria than the criteria in section 7 and a different criteria in section 9. So the suspension, whether it is counterproductive to the operational creditors, or it will be, as the government feel, will be giving a relief to the small and medium-sized companies from being triggered into the process of initiation of the CIR process. But few issues which can be gone into this is particularly that if suppose there is a suspension, ultimately taking of section 7, 9, and 10, then what will be the effective substitute? Then there has to be some substitute either for the recoveries, or there has to be some substitute for the operational creditors and other financial creditors who may fall within the bracket of that 1 lakh and 99 lakhs. This is also a very debatable issue. Number of ideas are being thrown in, like the amendment of section 271 of the Companies Act, like forcefully reviving the commercial suits, which are now under the Commercial Proceedings Act and which are now being taken up very seriously, particularly in the courts and the high courts where there is an original jurisdiction to file the commercial suits. Now, these are the all issues which are there for debate, for discussion. It all has to be ultimately seen that how and what in the interest of the IB code, its functionaries, the professionals, the companies, all stakeholders have to be taken before the government, and possibly, as it has been suggested earlier also by Justice Kumar, that rather than taking a unilateral action for suspension of 7, 9, and 10, why not to constitute a committee of experts which may go into the pros and cons of the whole issue, and particularly then take a meaningful idea about that how to go about suspending or not suspending sections 7, 9, and 10. And I thank you, PhD CCI, to give me this opportunity to share my views with the participants, as well as I thank you all my panelists also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. UK Chaudhary. It was a wonderful presentation. And now I would like to invite Dr. Abhishek Singhvi, who will give his inaugural address. And I would like to request now Dr. Singhvi to put forth his views.
Perhaps you couldn't hear me. Can you hear me now? If people can't hear me, then somebody will have to indicate, because I will keep assuming that I can be heard. But thank you, Vipul. Honorable Justice Kumar, Mr. Vipul Maheshwari, Mr. Chaudhary, Mr. Pavan Kumar, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, Mr. Santanu Shah, all the PhD family and all the participants. Just before the program started, I was saying that every cloud has a silver lining. Every bad thing is sometimes a blessing in disguise. So a whole new culture of what used to be bankruptcy jokes earlier. This time the bankruptcy jokes are being overtaken by the COVID jokes. And today is an intersection of bankruptcy and COVID. So for example, when I last spoke on bankruptcy, I remembered this wag saying that capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell. The very concept of hell. But it is overtaken by better COVID jokes, like the one where the pharmacist fainted when the lady asked for a mask with the color of the mask matching the sari. Then again, there are good quips about bankruptcy. In the old days before the IBC, which has made it now a pro-lender regime, it used to be said that bankruptcy is a legal remedy in which you put your money in your pants pockets and give your coat to your creditors thereafter. That used to be the pre-IBC regime. But these kind of puns are even better in COVID, which has been described literally as a pandemic, not a pandemic. So for example, somebody sent me a message yesterday saying we have discovered a new vaccine for COVID, which he said in his WhatsApp message is called GMCB20. GMCB20 like COVID-19. So when I asked him what GMCB is, he said, Ghar mein chup chap baitho 20. This is the vaccine. And to which, of course, the reply was that you tend to eat so much, ghar mein chupchap baitho vaccine, you tend to eat so much at home that you end up fattening your own curve, not flattening the COVID curve. So, I could go on, but if you think that you have invited me as a chief guest to beat around the bush, I can assure you I have some substantive points also. So, apart from beating around the bush, let me just make a few points. I was going to speak generally about IBC first and then about COVID and IBC. But I think I'll reverse the order because it seems that everybody is more interested about the COVID IBC. But I will end by making a few general comments about the IBC also. So the first one is the home bias point, which I had quite not noted, but with Justice Kumar draw my attention to. It's a very important point. I am one of those, having had the privilege or the misfortune of leading the battle on Pioneer's judgment, the Pioneer judgment of the Supreme Court, where I led for the petitioners. I have from day one, before I was engaged in the case, believed that 5(8)(f) was an ill-considered amendment. I have told the court also, and I argued that it's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. The IBC structure was never intended to receive home buyers. It is not that home buyers are not deserving. It is not that home buyers don't have a cause. But a Bheti Ganga cannot be the solution for all ills. You have to create a special remedial framework for home buyers. And I called it in the Supreme Court, which has noted it a square peg in a round hole or a round peg in a square hole. But anyway, they said that there is some substance, but we can't declare it unconstitutional. And till today, I believe strongly that a home buyer concept sits uneasily in the overall structure of the IBC. It, on the one hand, does violence to RERA, the RERA Act. On the other hand, it was never designed, as a matter of fact, to go back a little bit anecdotally, and in a lighter spirit, but it's actually true, that the inclusion of home buyers is actually judicial legislation by the Supreme Court, not by the legislature. I happen to be appearing for IDBI in the Supreme Court in the JP case for the creditor. In the JP case, the court started with somehow finding a solution for the JP home buyers and all the creditors. And they were balancing the equities. The bench of court number 1, as he then was Chief Justice Deepak Mishra. After 3 to 4 months, the clamor of the home buyers inside the courtroom became so loud because all the home buyers and their association would land up. And they said that we have to find an immediate remedy, not a longer term remedy. And the immediate one is put this chap to IBC. So the Supreme Court, after the first 3 months, started making observations almost daily about why home buyers are not being included in the IBC. Those observations reached a feverish pitch. And when they come from the Chief Justice of India and High Chief Justice Court's bench, then the government has to look up. And the government, therefore, unwillingly and hesitatingly, after 7 months of that proceeding, where I appeared personally, enacted 58F. Now, what they did in 58F was to just have the same act, the same vehicle, the same structure. They simply superimposed by a deeming fiction that this section by a deeming fiction shall include home buyers. That's why I call it a square peg in a round hole or a round peg in a square hole. Anyway, now the judgment has come. Those of you who have, and in Parliament we get these reports, they did a study of criminal law and found that the two biggest cloggers, those who jam the criminal law system in India, are Section 138 and 498A. The so-called check bouncers and the dowry issues. I'm not making a value, I'm talking of numbers. They alone constitute almost 20% of all criminal litigation in India, these two categories. I am making an unfortunate, possibly true, but still an unfortunate prediction that the home buyers category, which is now running at 17% of all IBC cases, home buyers who are just born a year and a half ago in IBC are already 17% of all cases, and that number has stopped because of COVID. With your level of NCLT benches, with your level of judges, with your level of a sole NCLAT, I think this will be the deluge which threatens to drown the infrastructure of IBC created for a totally different purpose. Now, when they realized there is some attempt to withstand the pressure, which is why the amendment was made, both the 1 lakh to 1 crore one, but more importantly, the allottees and the deposit trustees amendment, which, as we have noted, the Supreme Court has stayed the allottees part. But that will not solve the problem. There is only a small palliative. All of those who know the clients who are real estate builders have already started making different companies for each tower. So that if one tower has to go into liquidation, only that one tower company will go into liquidation, not the whole builder. They've already started doing it. But the numbers are so large, and theoretically, I know it's now better. Now the law is changed. When we argued Pioneer, this concept of one dissenting, unhappy person bringing the whole builder with, I appeared in Pioneer for a builder who was 98% kosher. 3 people out of 98 others objected to 3 flats in one tower. And it brought the whole thing under IBC. So all these are problems. Anyway, the numbers problem is going to be a major problem. And I think Justice Kumar is out of it. But if he was a president 5 years later, he might not like the number which I predict, unless you make many more NC-LAT benches, are going to overwhelm the IBC system. And unfortunately, this overwhelming will have a problem that the original purpose for which IBC was created will not be served. Now, friends, I am not going to repeat all the other notifications which have been mentioned to you. You know, the 28th March MCA notification, the 29th March 40C, the 24th of April government orders, etc. They've all been mentioned by different speakers. They all form part of the COVID corpus, so to say. As a matter of fact, perhaps the government, the regulators, and the authorities have not issued more COVID-related notifications and documents with IBC than any other subject. Maximum been issued here. I just want to add to them by reminding you, and perhaps they've been mentioned partly, that the 23rd March order of the Supreme Court, when I happened to be in court with the President of the Bar, and we made a joint request, which of course is a general excusing from limitation across the country. The Supreme Court suo motu order, which is a kind of a blanket release. It's a little awkwardly crafted, but it does serve the purpose. So that is the mega coverage under which different tribunals have also issued, High Court has issued, etc., etc. Now, this can't be seen in isolation from commercial means, and therefore you must also see the 27th March 2020 RBI notification, which deferred the repayment of the EMI schedule, as you know, for the months of March, April, and May. There was a deferment for 3 months. This, of course, has generated its own controversy because the date of the notification is 27th of March. And the banks were directed by RBI to give 3 months deferment. Given the bureaucratic mindset in India, what the banks is very interesting. They counted March as the first month, for which people had already paid EMI. And they said, you better start paying from June again. So controversy number one going on there is that you should count from April, May, and June. And the second and a bigger and a major controversy is that there should be some relief of the interest, because there is no relief of interest. As a matter of fact, many other countries, and I have now the details of that, which I won't bore you with, have given not even, some have given full waivers of interest, but some have given a very reduced interest rate, which is a need of the hour for such arrangements. There is, of course, a nice exception in the RBI notification of 27th March, that working capital loans case, a subcategory, the interest can be deferred also, and the rate can be renegotiated. And that they have addressed in the case of working capital loans. As Justice Kumar mentioned, there are many judgments, and the Bombay High Court has given, I think, an appropriate injunction against a pledgee encashing the pledge because of the steep decline in the value of the shares pledged to a pledgee. This is obviously, I think, makes sense, because all shares have fallen steeply. And they have said a attempt to have a top-up, as they call it, will be injuncted. The Bombay High Court has also explained the moratorium given by RBI, that it will also make sure that the NPA calculation itself will exclude this entire 90-day period, the very calculation and the approach. Then there is a review period, which is prescribed normally a 30-day review period, after which the 180-day resolution process period starts. The RBI has modified on 17th of April that 30-day review period also, and said that for the 30-day review period, we will exclude 1st of March to 31st of May. The Cabinet's proposal, I think, is a good one, pending with the Cabinet now. The suspension of 789. There are countries, and I'm going to give you a very interesting Singapore model, which have in fact suspended. And I understand there'll be technical difficulties, But the heart of the matter is that people should not be able to invoke. The operative word is invoke or activate. So it will apply to creditors who want to activate or trigger. The philosophy being that in such dire straits, when people can't stand on their legs, even though the creditor has a case, even though the creditor has a grievance, he should not be able to invoke. So in a sense, if this cabinet decision goes through as has gone through by statute in other countries, I think it would mean a suspension of the IBC jurisdiction for the next 3 months or 6 months, depending on which model they adopt. During which time I hope and trust that NCLTs can stop struggling with new filings and can take up disposal of arrears across the country, because they won't have much filings if this cabinet proposal goes through. There is also an interesting proposal just 1 or 2 days ago, which is not fructified, but is being under consideration, of an amendment to prepare for a pre-packaged insolvency process. This is a term of art, a pre-packaged insolvency process. It's a bit of a fancy term of art, where the restructuring plan has been agreed between the company and the creditors to ease the burden on the IBC courts. But these last two are obviously work jobs in the making, work in progress. I think on the whole, they are good ideas, and I hope they are passed with precision, which I will come to in a moment. Now, to ease the burden on IBC courts was the object here. This links with the fact that recent studies have shown, and there's a very interesting study by a Harvard person, Professor Mark Rowe, sometime in April or May 2020. An aspect we forget, and he built on a 2018 US study, that the aftermath of such pandemic may actually burden the IBC courts with a humongous number of cases. This Harvard professor writes that the probability of inundating bankruptcy courts because of the complete decimation of business is a real reality. He writes in the US context, but I think it's something the Indian context should take note of. And the same sentiment is shown in earlier studies that crises accentuate and enhance the burden and load on your entire infrastructure. And I've always believed that the infrastructure of giving 2 or 3 jurisdictions to one set of tribunals, 2 in the case of NCLT and 3 in the case of NCLAT, with the kind of, and it doesn't matter how many buildings you have, with the kind of strength you have and the kind of delay in appointments you have, makes it absolutely a non-starter. All the theory, all the seminars, all the sermons become non-relevant, because it creates, these crises create what these articles call a debt gridlock. A debt gridlock. That's the word used by Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, who got the Nobel Prize. And he says it requires a very coordinated, cohesive response, which unfortunately, qua our adjudicators, is lacking. Now, let me come to an interesting aspect. You have found that, what are these notifications? I just, I said 4 or 5 of them. The speakers before mentioned 5 more of them, which I avoided mentioning by repetition. So let's say there are 10 of them addressing the IBC area. There are hundreds more in the general economic area. Now, they're all well-intentioned. They are good. But the problem is that they are patchy. They are disaggregated. They are diffused. They are episodic. They are piecemeal. I think of something, there's a hole there, there's a gap, I patch it with a new notification. Some other authority thinks of it, they fix that for the time being. But it is not a holistic, coordinated, larger approach. Now, for that approach, I want to draw your attention to a fascinating statute and regulations passed in Singapore, which of course is doing all kinds of things regarding COVID. And they were a high achiever in the early stages. Then they had an explosion of COVID, and now they again seem to be in control. And the Singapore statute, incidentally, the first part is a set of regulations which deal with all kinds of things. It's the most comprehensive thing, and I strongly commend it for India, because it puts everything together as a comprehensive code. Uncertainty is reduced, fights are reduced, litigation is reduced, lack of clarity is reduced, codification is there. One set of regulations codifies everything to do with things like social gatherings, distancing, going out, etc. Then the main statute, and I just spent 5 minutes on this because this is possibly not very well known in India, and I would commend it for the Indian context. Starts with a preamble which says an act to provide temporary measures and deal with other matters. This, by the way, is in April 2020 in Singapore. An act to provide temporary measures and deal with other matters relating to COVID-19 pandemic and to make a consequential amendment to the Property Tax Act, etc. Then, if you go to the heart and soul of this act, after the preamble, it's part 2, which has sections 4 and 5. They're very fascinating. It says this part will apply to all contracts, but not to contracts entered into after a certain date in March 2020, which means with knowledge of COVID, if you enter into a contract, because end of March 2020, COVID is known, then the governing term of the contract will govern. This statute will not protect you. It then says it will include contracts with the government. So government is also bound. Then in section 4, it gives the broad test. If a party is unable to perform an obligation in the contract, and contracts are widely defined to include everything, and inability is to a material extent caused by a COVID event, look at the precision, then he has to do one or two things like notify the other party, etc. And then comes a provision which is very precise on limitation. Expiry of the prescribed period, withdrawal, etc. All the periods are excluded by a very specific limitation pull. Then it gives a massive, fantastic list of almost 22 items I counted of the kind of proceedings which are to be suspended or where limitation will not apply or where enforcement can't happen. I'll give you a few examples, but I can't give you all. The commencement or continuation of an action in a court against A or A's guarantor. The commencement or continuation of arbitral proceedings under the Arbitration Act. The enforcement of any security over any immovable property. The enforcement of any security over any immovable property for the purpose of trade, business, or profession. The making of an application for a meeting of creditors under the Companies Act. It goes on like this to 22 cases. See, the idea is to give relief for COVID. So either you go whole hog and be precise. The idea is that you don't allow a person to have a creditors meeting to go and take action. If you don't want to do it, be precise. At least nobody is uncertain. The making an application of winding up. The making of a bankruptcy application. The appointment of a receiver. All these are dealt with specifically. It then, after this 4 and 5, which is very detailed set of sections, there are specific sections on specific contracts. 6 deals with construction contracts. 7 deals with tourism-related contracts. My purpose is not to copy. My purpose is to say, why should India not have a codified, comprehensive, specific, clear, unequivocal code? And so on. And then section 10 onwards has a very nice concept of assessors. A whole group of assessors who are like relatively junior judges is created to assess each case. And the whole system is given them, which I'm not repeating, to assess whether the issue is arising from a material extent from COVID, in which case the excusing benefit will apply. And then there are, of course, all kinds of provision for financially distressed individuals, for LLPs, for AOPs, for other businesses, etc. So the point of, and I could have spoken on this by itself for the whole session, but I'm just giving you a synoptic thumbnail sketch, because I think the advantage of this certainty and clarity and specificity is very important. Otherwise, we go hunting in regulation X, regulation Y, one by the NCA, one by the RBI, one by the IBBI, one by the Government of India, etc. And it creates confusion. My next point arises from Mr. Chaudhary's mention of this virtual lawyering. I happened to write an article in the India Express about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago on this court. And I said that this is though for the Supreme Court, but it will apply to other courts. And I think we are getting it partly wrong. A, there are not 2 periods, there are 3 periods. There is a lockdown, and then there is no normal. There is what I call a semi-normal, followed by a normal. Suppose on 17th of May, we put a stop to the lockdown. Do you think that we will all land up in the courts on the 18th of May? How many of us are prepared to go to the Supreme Court on 18th of May in hundreds and thousands? The average population in the Supreme Court per day is about 2,000 or maybe 1,500, all told. Staff, clerks, lawyers. So lockdown and stoppage of lockdown is not a magic bullet or a magic button. You have to prepare in the semi-normal period for at least 2 to 3 months. So you have to augment your capacity. These are not things which judges have to bother about. A paltry amount of 25 to 50 crores is required for the Supreme Court to have full capacity of working as virtual lawyering. I told the court when I appeared in the Supreme Court through video conferencing that I was amazed to find that the judges were sitting together. If there is social distancing for us, there should be social distancing in their own benefit, in their own protection also. Possibly because they could not confer and decide a case unless they sat together. Because the technology did not allow them to mute people and discuss amongst themselves. These are kind of silly small things which are holding India back. I wrote in the article that there are 35 judges in the Supreme Court. Of course, my article is Supreme Court specific, but it can apply with modifications to every tribunal in every high court. 35 judges, I said, it's time we prepared that even in the normal after September, maybe 25 to 33% cases continue to be decided by virtual lawyering. Even today, out of 35, we are having hardly 2 or 3 benches in Supreme Court, which are deciding hardly less than 100 cases. They are functioning on a vacation court strength, and of those 100, maybe 70 are PILs of the kind about COVID measures, etc. So you can imagine what is being done. Now, there's no reason why at this time you must keep the filing restriction. The test for filing, which is so stringent, must be retained, because otherwise a lot of kachra is filed, both in the tribunals, in the High Court and in the Supreme Court. But while controlling the filing and keeping a set of 2 or 3 benches to do with the current filings, there is no reason why virtual lawyering cannot be used to allow other benches to dispose of 10-year-old and 5-year-old matters, and they can dispose of hundreds. My next point takes up from Justice Kumar's point about package. And this is not about law, but I must spend 2 minutes, because law is not in isolation. Law is not an ivory tower. Law sits in the middle of concrete packages, the reality. As they say, without a fiscal injection, nothing else will work. All these are 1/4 measures. And here again, I must clarify that monetary policy has its role. Monetary policy is important, but it is highly limited. Nothing short of a direct injection of fiscal kind helps. When you are unwell, you are given a syrup. When you are a little more unwell, you give a tablet. But when you are really unwell, you are given a direct injection in the thigh. You have to have a fiscal injection, and I'm sorry to say that all this hullabaloo we are talking about, the total fiscal injection in India is 0.7% of GDP. So, we can keep doing something for IBC, something for this. 0.7% of GDP is the total. I have a list of countries where a country like Malaysia has given a fiscal injection of 16% as against our 0.7%. Bangladesh is 2.5%. So we need to, without that, you cannot do anything in terms of relief, real relief. Secondly, the monetary policy, I must tell you a very funny thing which happened. That when the bank said that you will reduce our reverse repo rate so that people can be, banks can be encouraged to give loans, and your IBC is closely connected with loans. The banks insisted on putting money back with the RBI because there was nobody to take the loan. People said there's no demand, no injection, so who's going to take the loan? So I think the point made that the larger context of economic well-being is required is extremely important. Friends, let me now come back to a few general points of IBC and then end. And on those general points of IBC, which I think are important from the legal viewpoint, I want to say this. Our Act is about 3.5 years old. But I find, and this is my first general point, it is probably been more amended in these 3.5 years than any other new baby. Somebody mentioned that the baby straight away went into adulthood. He's absolutely right, but along with adulthood, the amendments are too many. It's because we are again doing patchy, episodic reactions. We have to think out, we can't keep amending acts to meet a situation. We have to have a harmonious approach. And therefore, we have to minimize such, because amendments multiply litigation. Amendments lead to lack of clarity. They lead to discontinuous, obstructive kind of a management of a situation. As somebody joked that instead of being a biannual document or an annual document, we are in danger of making the IBC not even a fortnightly, but a daily. There are so many amendments happening all the time, and we should control that. We should think out and we should make sophisticated things which will stand the test of time. That's my first general point. Number 2 point, when we make amendments, we have to be more elegant, more precise, more focused. Take 29A, for example. 29A may be a very useful provision, but it's one of the worst drafted provisions in my opinion, in terms of pure draftsmanship. 29A has a rule, it has an exception, and then it has an exception to an exception. As somebody said, it took 6 years to draft my 3-year contract. If they fire me, I can live inside the contract. This kind of thing requires, and therefore complete confusion reigns when we start interpreting 29A. My third point is that these multiple amendments means that we are lucky till now to avoid it, but we'll start having litigation about retrospectivity and clarification. Is this amendment retrospective? Is this clarificatory? Luckily, on 1 or 2 situations, like the 6th of June 2018 amendment to 29A, this issue whether this amendment will apply from henceforth or for the past did not arise. But a huge amount of litigation will come unless we are careful. Friends, I want to say that in Arcelor, I did say that it is very unreal to expect that a person who is required to bid for debtor A will first pay out all his dues to debtor B, to whom he is a person connected. Only then he will be allowed to bid for A. The better thing would be that he is allowed to bid for A with an undertaking that if he wins the bid for A, he will pay off the dues of B. The court has held otherwise. But the result is that fewer and fewer bidders will come, because if they have a due to any other corporate debtor, then they have to first clear it. And after they clear it, if they lose the bid for the first one, their money is gone. Limitation, my last point, there are many more points, but I'll end with the want of time. Limitation, the subject under IBC is in a mess. Limitation, I had the privilege of arguing many cases in the Supreme Court, was settled by the Supreme Court by Justice Nariman's judgments mostly after a gap over 1 year or so. During that 1 year, there were zigzag judgments by the NCLAT, and it took a while for the NCLAT to sync itself with the Supreme Court judgments. In the meanwhile, there is utter uncertainty, because whether it is 12 years or 3 years, whether this applies or that applies in terms of limitation, whether the date when the IBC came applies or not, all took almost a year to iron out. Anyway, now it is all ironed out. The tragedy is that now there is a batch of limitation matters pending before a 3-judge bench in the Supreme Court. That bench has prima facie, of course, no doubt, openly expressed the view that the judgments of the Supreme Court by the earlier bench are probably wrong and have to be overruled. So it will again be back to square one with happy hunting ground for lawyers, but not necessarily a very good thing for IBC. Friends, thank you so much for giving me time. These are a practitioner's observations, a practitioner's approaches, but this is the reality on the ground of how IBC operates both within COVID and without COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singhvi, for a wonderful presentation, along with, of course, a nice anecdotes also. And thank you very much for being here with us. Now, I would request Mr. G.P. Madan, who is our co-chair, to take Q&A with the participants. since we have the eminent speakers, Mr. G.P. Madan.
Thank you, Vipul ji. Thank you, everybody. Thanks all the three legal luminaries. An excellent presentation by all three of them. And I don't know whether Justice Kumar and Dr. Chaudhary are still there. Mr. Sharma, can you confirm, are they there with us right now?
Yes, they're there. Mr. Kumar is there.
Mr. Kumar, no, his name is, okay, Justice Kumar is there. One thing which is made clear, there are the four issues which have noted down, which have been made clear by all the three legal luminaries. Number one, that the limit of 1 lakh to 1 CR is prospective in effect.
Mr. Madan, I have to leave because I have to go in another panel.
Can you, sir,
Just
please?
10 minutes, sir.
Next 10 minutes we are closing if you can afford us.
Sorry?
We will be closing, sir, within next 10 minutes. If
Okay.
that's possible for you, sir.
Carry on.
Okay. Another is that suspension of 7, 9, and 10 may have its own severe consequences. Third is that we need to have a consolidated code. And fourth is that we need fiscal injection of fiscal stimulus. With this, I just take the queries of the participants. There are a number of queries, but I have summarized those queries in 4 different categories. The first category is on pre-pack. And I think our senior vice president also raised the issue in his inaugural address. Whether it's pre-package insolvency resolution will be a reality and will be successful in Indian scenario. And I leave it open to all the 2 or 3 legal luminaries. Dr. Chaudhary is not there. I leave it open to Dr. Singhvi as well as Justice Kumar.
I'll just take 30 seconds. I don't think this is necessarily a priority at the moment, but it is something which eventually we have to experiment with. And I think the jury is out as to how much it will work. It's at the moment a proposal, somewhat tentative proposal. I think the expert bodies like the IBBI are the best people to study it in detail about the actual success in other countries. But I think it's nothing we should be scared of or anathema.
Well, if I may add, in England, pre-pack are very popular. This is not part of the code there. These are professionally evolved mechanism. So what happens in pre-pack, if a company is drifting towards the stress assets, it enters into an arrangement with another company or 2 other companies, and if insolvency is triggered, application is filed, administrator, as they call the RP there, is appointed, then that agreement is given effect. So that is the pre-pack, because when we visited various law firm there, the pre-pack in textbook has been recognized, but pre-pack as such. So in the shape of settlement, in a week's time, in 10 days time, the pre-pack is placed before the insolvency court, and which is accepted, and nothing happens. Overnight, the management of the company undergo change. But that is a very mature system. Here in India, if that start happening, because at the stage of joint lender forum, committee meeting, such things are happening, but they are not to the extent as prevalent in a country, mature country like England. So pre-pack, if it happens, and because during COVID-19, this impact of COVID-19 may not be overcome by pre-pack, because everybody is in the same boat. Who would come forward to invest in a situation like this? So the answer, as Dr. Singhvi have said, that there has to be lower interest rate loan available. It has been said that the situation post-COVID-19 is going to be like post-World War II. And the interest rate in India, 6%. In country like England, 1%, even 0.5%. So some package, that is why in the opening remarks I have mentioned that apart from suspending 7, 9, 10, some package of this type has to be rolled out in order to help the corporate sector, MSME, to overcome the menace of COVID-19.
Thank you, sir. Another question is that IBC actually led to some extent discipline in the business and contractual payments. Now, these two amendments, one lakh to 1 CR, another is the proposed amendment of suspension of 7, 9, and 10. Will it not lead to chain of defaults, including defaults in payment to banks?
Can you repeat it, Mr. Madan?
Sir, the questioner says that IBC actually led to discipline in business and contractual payments. Now, these two amendments, one which has actually happened, 1 lakh to 1 CR limit, and another is a proposed amendments to ordinance maybe of suspension of 7, 9, and 10. Will it not lead to more defaults, particularly payment of loans or installments to banks?
Well, it will cut both ways. If you can start contemplating, you see, there may be a defaulter, unless he default to the extent of 1 crore, no CIR process can be triggered. So there may be less number of cases, and the rationale for raising the threshold is to save MSME from any embarrassment. Now, MSME are required to be paid by the public sector or by any other corporate sector within 45 days. If not paid, then 3 times rate of interest. How many times it is happening? If you study MSME pattern, that these penal provisions are not operational to the extent they are supposed to be. So, on the one hand, we have debarred MSME to come to the NCLT by invoking section 9 or even 7. On the other hand, we are saying that bar has been raised in order to help them. So because the amendment does not clarify that no action against MSME can be taken, or MSME, it will exclude MSME. They can come. No, that is not the amendment. Amendment is in a blanket fashion.
I would say about this point very briefly that, see, there is no doubt that it cuts, and there are many angles to it, cuts in different directions. But on the whole, I would support this part for the reason, the principal reason is that you have to see the basis, you have to see the infrastructure you created. You can't allow the good to drown because your infrastructure is limited. Now, 1 lakh in today's debased rupee value, where court fees have also been increased from 50 lakhs to 1 crore, 1 crore to 2 crore. 1 lakh is no threshold to cross. Now, the infrastructure which Justice Kumar presided over, according to me, is negligible compared to the demand when IBC is in full flow. So, one very important consideration for me is that when everybody starts using IBC properly, it should be able to function efficiently. And I don't think you have the manpower or the capacity on a 1 lakh threshold is the biggest reason. Number two, it is not MSME specific. The only negative part, as he rightly puts it, is that MSMEs can't recover. But then, well, MSMEs have been given special methods of recovery. There is, as the Act he mentioned, treble interest. Now, it is true that it is not easily enforced. But then the answer is to make that enforcement better rather than to clog the IBC, which is not MSME specific. So, IBC is a much wider concept. And for MSMEs, you can make a special act. If you find that the treble interest act is not working, amend that act. make it more punitive, make it more threatening. And ultimately, it is the government which is doing it. If the government was to issue, they are the ones who make the amendments. If they were to issue a series of notifications strongly striking the head of all their PSUs, that you jolly well can do everything else later, but you must pay the MSMEs first, then I think it will make a difference. So my point is that the MSME object is good, but you should solve it through the different route of that act or notifications, not through the IBC route.
Thank you, Dr. Singhvi. The number of questions are pouring in, but I'll take the last question. And this question has been asked by many participants. And that is on withdrawal of resolution plan. Now the resolution applicant has filed the plan, and in one stage plan is pending before the COC. And stage number 2, plan has been approved by COC, is pending before the adjudicating authority. Now at this stage, where the unit, the company, the CD's business is no more viable, whether this resolution applicant withdraw this particular resolution plan. And this question is to both Justice Kumar as well as Dr. Singhvi.
Very well. As I have already said, that before COC, you can file an application for withdrawal of the plan unless it is approved. But once it is approved, in the code, there are penal provision if you resile from the approved plan. As I said, there has to be some relief from the government with regard to the plans approved by COC and waiting approval from the adjudicating authority NCLT. Because there is not only pecuniary fine, there are prosecutions also. In some cases, in 2-3 cases, this has to be done. I also imposed a fine. So because COVID-19 would impact a plan which is pending approval of the NCLT, although approved by but before the COC, there should not be a problem.
Dr. Singhvi, please. Dr. Singhvi, please unmute yourself.
I don't have to say much on this because I entirely agree. I've always believed that already 12A, I believe that's the provision if I remember, 12 capital A, is a very rigid, inflexible kind of a straitjacket. And it never imagined or dreamt of COVID or anything resembling COVID. So flexibility means that you have to at least leave some play in the joints. You can choose whom you give the play in the joints to. You can give it to NCLT as a tribunal and give it to NCLT. But you can't say that what has happened is cast in stone. That's the problem with it. And I think it's very simple to trust your tribunal. The tribunal is already dealing with the COC's recommendation, the report at large. And, I don't think it's a very big deal. It should be done. It must be done.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Singhvi. There is one more question which will not raise to the panelists because in the last webinar, Justice Kumar answered that. That is Section 8 notice has been given before 24th of March. Amount of default is less than 1 crore. Whether a petition, whether an application under Section 9 can be filed. Justice Kumar replied in the last webinar that this cannot be filed at this point of time. With this, I convey my thanks to all the panelists, and I now request Mr. Dinesh Agarwal to give his concluding remarks. Dinesh ji, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. Am I here?
Sir, please unmute. Please unmute firstly.
Yeah, I have done it.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Am I audible?
Ji, sir. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am very fortunate to have such a fruitful discussion of such a stalwarts of the legal fraternity of the India. And we are very fortunate, and I am aware that we are running behind time. So I will not take much of the time. I give my heartfelt thanks to all the learned speaker for their participation in the seminar. My heartfelt thanks to all the organizers of this video conferencing to organize in this epidemic time and have all the all the participants to have such a benefit of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vipulji, there are a number of questions, and what I suggest to you that we can compile all those questions, and from our IBC committee, we can try to answer all those queries through email. Vipulji, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, we will do this, and I make sure to all the participants that we will be sending the answer to all your questions, and would appreciate if you can send your email ID also, so that it becomes easier for us to send it across to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. S.P. Sharma, you want to say something? Unmute, please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself, Dr. S.P. Sharma.
I think he has not unmuted himself. That's okay.
Dr. Sharma, you have not unmuted yourself.
Yes, sir. Yeah. We are thankful to our chairman and co-chairmen for organizing this wonderful discussion and fruitful webinar, and looking forward to more such webinars in the coming time, sir.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sharma. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Dinesh. Thank you.
And I must convey and confess that today our this entire event, when the registration was closed, at the last moment, I made a request to Dr. S.P. Sharma that can it be made live on YouTube, and he did all that arrangement. My heartiest compliments to you, Dr. Sharma.
Oh, this is on live YouTube.
Yes, sir. This was
Oh,
online.
excellent.
Ji.
You can see the recording later on.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All
Thank
the
you,
best.
sir. Looking forward. Thank you, sir.